Welcome to the SYA podcast, giving you teachings from the young adult ministry of Shepherd Church, where it's our mission to lift up Christ that the world might believe. We meet every Thursday at Shepherd Church in Porter Ranch. For more info, go to wearesya.com.
Hello, my friends. So this is a little bit different. Last Thursday, we had some technical difficulties and we did not capture the sermon. So since we just began posting our sermons onto a podcast as well as onto YouTube, we're just not videoing them anymore. But since we didn't get it last week, I thought, well, I'm just going to try to do an actual podcast episode, throw this sermon on there, and who knows, maybe it'll be more conversational, or maybe you'll hate it. And while I'm not totally media ignorant, I wasn't sure how to make a recording on my laptop to where it actually sounded okay. So I did what any guy in his 40s would do. I asked my 15-year-old son, and he was all, yeah, Dad, you do this, and then you do that. And also, here's my portable microphone, just plug it into your laptop. And so that's what I did. And here we are, and we're just going to see how this goes. I'm not, of course, promising that I'm just going to jump out into the interweb ether and say podcast things outside of the normal sermons that we post from SYA on Thursdays, but who knows? And by the way, if you've stumbled on here, SYA stands for Shepherd Young Adults, and it's a gathering of 18 to 25-year-olds on Thursday nights at Shepherd Church. We're near Los Angeles. You can find us on Instagram at wearesya or online at wearesya.com. And also, I'm not going to edit this at all. So if I end up, saying, if I make mistakes and say stupid stuff, well, it's just going to stay on there. But here's what I want to tell you in this. Character is everything. Who you are is infinitely more important than what you say, build, lead, or post, because all of that flows from your character. It flows from who you are. And maybe you've had opportunities based on something that you said. And maybe you have opportunities based on something you built or led. But maybe you weren't able to handle those opportunities in your character. I want to tell you this John Maxwell quote. He said, our gifts or abilities can take us further than our character can sustain us. And I have seen this in so many young adults who are so talented and get amazing opportunities, but their soul, their character wasn't the thing for them. They were all about talent or all about the opportunities. The scriptures say this in Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, above all else, guard your heart because everything flows from it. And this ancient Hebrew concept of the heart wasn't like the organ as much as it was the mind, your will, your free will, how you think. It's where courage and conscience and the soul, it's all of that packed into this idea of the heart. Above all, guard it, guard your character, because everything flows from it. Now, there's lots of definitions of character. Here's my shot at a definition. Character is who you are, shaped by past choices, and who you're becoming, shaped by your present way of decision making. It also includes your moral courage, the way you take or dismiss responsibility, and your response, your attitude to the world around you. And really, listen, character might be the only thing in the world that you can control, because you can't control your circumstances completely. You can't control the choices and attitudes of other people. You can try to manipulate them, but you can't control them. Character, your choices, your attitude, that's all you can control, and that's why it is everything. So here it is, here's the whole talk in a sentence, and then I'm going to break it down. Character leaks, character is cumulative, and character is revealed by the storms of pain and pleasure. I'm going to take a drink. I'm totally not chewing gum right now, which is just not normal for me when I'm talking for a long time, but I thought if I'm like smacking gum on here, you're going to hear it more. So now instead, I'm going to get cotton mouth, and you're going to have to hear me take drinks every once in a while. Okay, character leaks. It like seeps out in our words, in our fears, and like it oozes out of our anger. Character leaks. You can only pretend for so long, because whatever you've put into your soul is going to leak out. So the key to knowing what you've put into your soul is self-awareness. And one of my favorite New Testament scriptures, Romans chapter 12, verse 3, it says, "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment." And that Greek word sober, it literally means not drunk. Because think about it, when a person's drunk, they either think they're invincible, like they can run through a wall, or they're like so low, they think so lowly of themselves that it's just pitiful. And Paul here in Romans 12, verse 3, he's saying don't do either. Don't think too highly or too lowly of yourself. Have a sober judgment. And the way you do that is self-awareness, getting to know yourself and living in self-awareness. It takes time, and it is painful. It's going to take courageous honesty to own your strengths and your weaknesses, and to have a willingness to grow aware of your confirmation biases. Now, most of you know what a confirmation bias is, even if you don't know the definition. But basically, it's the tendency to filter new evidence or information through what you already believe. Like, this is kind of your subconscious way of just confirming what you already think or what you want to be true. So what I want to do is, here are a couple tools to grow in your self-awareness. Ask what I'm calling humility questions. Now, I'm going to give you a few of these humility questions that I came up with, but obviously it's not exhaustive. Here's one. What are my vulnerable areas of confirmation bias? Here's a personal example for me, but I began to notice some years ago that, like, if you would have asked me, do I believe that I've had privileges and advantages because I'm both white and a male, I would have said yes. I think there have been some. It's been a part of the majority within power structures, all of that. But I began to notice that when people began to talk about white male privilege, I would sometimes get in a defensive thought process. I may not say it. And so whatever thoughts I had to really begin to work towards some self-awareness by asking, is this a vulnerable area of my confirmation bias? Like, have I really worked out these thoughts that are coming my way, or am I just being defensive? And that's a real one. First of all, whatever your confirmation biases are, and whatever mine are, we've all got them. So you're probably thinking of some right now, and they may not be pretty, but having confirmation bias is inevitable. But knowing what yours are, if they're connected to race or gender, liberal issues, conservative issues, whatever, knowing what yours are, it's going to grow you in self-awareness, and that's going to give you space for humility, for actual humility. Here's another humility question. Where do I tend to pronounce swift and passionate judgment on others without having honest dialogue first? This is confirmation bias at its worst, but it's ultimately about insecurity. Like, when you see that you are just super quick and passionate to judge other people, but you've not asked them any questions, you've not tried to get to know their story, you've not had an honest dialogue and really let them unpack maybe their view. If you've not done that first, then that's something to be aware about. Here's another one. If I am an emotional decision maker, which, here's a little secret, we are all emotional decision makers. I don't care how logical you think you are, your emotions still play a major factor in how you make decisions. But so when thinking about how you make decisions, how much time are you taking to process the decision? Do you take the advice of wise counsel? Or if you're honest, do you just ask for advice so that you don't really want to hear what that wise person might advise you? You're wanting to just kind of share how you're feeling. Maybe you find yourself doing that a lot. If you can be aware of that, if you can just acknowledge it, that'd be the first step. Then that's a step toward self-awareness. Here's another couple questions I wrote down. Humility questions. Just a tool to work toward self-awareness. How quickly do I take responsibility for my part of whatever issue without instantly or at all pointing out the fault of other people involved? I was at Chipotle the other night, because I'm at Chipotle at least once a week, and one of the young adults working there, they were kind of like low on all the ingredients, and they had kind of a dinner rush. And he said to me, just to me once, but then to all those around me 3 different times, he said, man, the morning crew didn't do anything. And he like really wanted us to know, basically, hey, this isn't my fault. This is the morning crew. They didn't stock up on the stuff. And here's the deal. Maybe that's true. And I just smiled when he said it, because all I'm thinking, and probably all the people in line are thinking, are, dude, we don't care. We don't care whose fault it is that it's taking longer for you guys to make our food. We just want our food. And there would have been such a different attitude of respect for this kid had he just apologized and said, hey, we got to make up some stuff. I'm so sorry about your wait, or whatever. But forget the kid at Chipotle. How quickly do you take responsibility for your part without instantly or at all pointing out the fault of other people involved? And one last humility question I'll throw out. How often during disagreements and conflict do you interrupt other people? Because, man, if you notice yourself interrupting people a lot, especially when you're in a disagreement or a conflict, listen, that is a solid leak. And you need to be aware of that so you can eventually do something about it. So, tools to work toward self-awareness. First one, ask humility questions. Next, remove specific language. Here's some examples. If you constantly say, as someone's telling you something, if you're saying, oh, yeah, I know. I always do that. Or you hear about something and you say, oh my gosh, how stupid. I would never do that. Someone gives you advice and you say, no, that will never work. I mean, first of all, if you're using always and never a lot, that's a leak, right? Try to remove that. Because those who can't learn anything, and I'm putting quotations and marks around learn, because of course they can learn something, they just refuse to. Those who act like they already know it all, those who can't learn anything, they likely struggle the most in private. I'm going to take another drink from my water. So the tool here, remove some specific language. There's more, but there's a few examples. Then add specific language. Like I say a lot, if you've ever been in a conversation with me and I've given you advice, I've said, listen, I may be wrong. Or I may say, look, I'm not certain exactly how all of this works, but here's my take. That's a way I might say it sometimes. Or I might say, look, the way I feel about this is, because I'm not attacking anybody, and I'm certainly not using language of certainty. See what I did there? I'm certainly not using language of certainty. Okay, next tool, reconsider your critics. Like, clearly you don't agree with everything a critic of yours is saying or condemning in you, right? Like you don't agree with all of it. But if you can learn to try to find space, even in the heat of the moment, of a critic, to ask, where might they be right? And it doesn't have to be in the moment, actually. It can be in retrospect. This is liberating. For me, one of the first moments of this in my young adult life, and when I first became a pastor, I was a youth pastor in Missouri for 8 years. And just a little bit about my personality, I have an aversion to being talked down to, or at least if I feel like I'm being talked down to. And there was a leader in the church that wanted to mentor me, even though I had not asked him to mentor me. And he was frustrating. I felt like he talked down to me a lot. And one night after a leadership meeting, I came home. I was telling Amy about this guy and how he talked down to me. And I'm sure I was even saying some negative things. And she, of course, like any good wife and friend and partner, she began to, defend me like, oh, I can't believe this or that. And part of my personality also is a contrarian. So I tend to always want to try to look at the other side when it's not inconvenient for me. And I started to do that out of just kind of a knee-jerk reaction. I wasn't thinking really. And by trying to look at it from this guy's point of view, because I kind of was like, well, and almost defending him, like, well, what I think he was trying to say, by doing that, not meaning to, I wasn't trying to be like righteous and cool and wise or whatever, but by doing so, I accidentally realized that something he had been saying about me was 100% true. And that was painful. So reconsider your critics. Here's the last thing that I want to say, at least for some tools of working towards self-awareness. Take some personality tests. There's a ton of them out there. Some really popular right now is the Enneagram. Enneagram, if you've never heard of it, I remember hearing about it years ago on a podcast, and I didn't know how to spell it. It's Enneagram, Enneagram. You can find some of those for free online. You can go deeper and pay for one. There's the DISC, D-I-S-C, the DISC profile. And if you want the website for that one's been around for a while, discprofile.com. There's the classic Myers-Briggs test. There's lots. The key is just like trying some of those. And of course, none of them are going to like capture your soul completely. But most of them, if you answer the questions right, they do a pretty good job. I've taken tons, and they tend to capture my leadership style and personality profile pretty accurately. So take some personality tests. It'll allow you to get to know yourself and probably tell you some things that you already know, but you can begin to dive deeper as you begin to work some of these tools towards self-awareness. Okay, what we put in will leak out. So get to know what's in there. Self-awareness makes space for more humility and growth. Okay, so that was number one, character leaks. Here's number two. Character is cumulative. Like, you don't slip into or slip out of solid, consistent character. It's not like one big good decision, and it's also not one big bad decision. Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 44, he said, you identify a tree by its fruit, right? And like the fact that a tree has fruit, it doesn't mean that the tree is like completely blemish free. Like the tree can end up producing some rotten fruit, and it can also have parts of the tree that have even rotted, but if it's still good enough to grow fruit, you can say that's a fruit tree. Character is cumulative, like a snowball. So there's the tree and fruit illustration. Here's mine, a snowball illustration. Like if you want to build a snowball, you still might and likely are going to have little pebbles, maybe dirt and some grass in the snowball. And that's okay. It can still be a good snowball as long as you have more snow than you have rock or dirt or grass. And it's the same with your character. Like, of course, you're going to make mistakes. Of course, you're going to have flaws. But if what you're putting in, if what you're building cumulatively is more godly and more wise and more generous and more kind, like your character is going to be more solid. So here's some things I got from Andy Stanley's book called Ask It. 5 cumulative truths. He was talking about character overall, but he was specifically talking about some other things, but these work perfect in thinking about how character is cumulative. Here's thought number 1 from Andy Stanley. There is a cumulative value to investing small amounts of time in certain activities over a long period. The easiest one, as an example, is exercise. Like if you go 3 to 5 days consistently for a year, those are small steps, at least like each day is a small step, but added up over a year, you're going to see some pretty good results. But you don't notice those big results after one workout session, which is why it's easy to talk yourself out of one of the workout sessions, right? Or two or three, because you'll say, well, what's it going to hurt if I miss one day or 2 days, right? Here's some other examples, like closeness with God. If you know people that are close to God, well, listen, I'm telling you, they pray often. They read scripture often, and they gain it. They get wisdom from wise, godly people often. But if you were to ask them, hey, what, how, like some of the disciplines that you did yesterday, prayer time, reading, whatever, like tell me about it. They're probably not going to be able to tell you why it was so great that one specific day. It's the cumulative effect. This is also true of intentional time, talking with your significant other, if you had a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or people in your family. Like, it's not the one conversation. It's the cumulative effect of many conversations. On and on. Savings account, dinner with the family, on and on. There's rarely an immediate value in these for the one time. It's the cumulative value. And character development is the same. How you process decisions, your work on the tools of self-awareness, the way you take responsibility or don't, all of it has cumulative value. Here's a second thought from Andy Stanley. There are rarely immediate consequences for neglecting single installments of time in any area of life. Like if you decide to exercise or eat more healthy or attend church more consistently, begin tithing, whatever it is, there's not going to be immediate consequences for neglecting that once, other than maybe shame, like you feel shame for it, but shame doesn't change people. Hope does. So consequences don't come immediately. And it's easy to justify neglecting character based on the past good. Like people do this with diets all the time. It's called moral thin slicing. Like, if you've eaten really healthy for a week and you decide, well, and maybe you have a cheat day built in, that might be a little different if it's like a consistent, schedule. But people often do this without building it in. They just do it kind of like because they think they've done so good. I've eaten so good for 5 days, and you have this opportunity to eat an entire box of Krispy Kreme, and you're like, you know what? I've eaten really good for the last 5 days. I think I'm just going to do it. And it's this idea of moral thin slicing. There's actually a really interesting survey that found a large percentage of people who voted for Barack Obama, they were revealed to be even more racist after they voted for President Obama. And so the idea is that subconsciously they felt like they had done their part, quote unquote. Like moral thin slicing happens when we do something well and we use it to justify something bad or to go off plan because I just did so well. There are rarely immediate consequences for neglecting single installments of time in any area. Third thought about the cumulative effect. The habit of neglecting has a cumulative effect. I don't think I need to beat the dead horse here, but if you don't become aware and honest about the lies that you've maybe been telling, or the way that you make excuses, or the way you pronounce judgment, this builds. If you have a habit of neglecting the acknowledgement and the change, this builds and it becomes who you are. Like if you don't acknowledge and deal with the lies that you've been telling and you continue to do that, there's going to be a cumulative effect where you become a liar. Okay, fourth cumulative thought, and there's only 5. There's no cumulative value to the urgent things we allow to interfere with things we had previously deemed important. So think about some goals that you neglected. What was so important that kept you from those goals? You probably can't remember specifically, right? So if it was an interruption or just something more shiny in the moment, it had no value. It was really kind of wasted time. You can't even remember what it was, but it neglected you from the goal. And few of you would say that solid, consistent character isn't essential. Few of us would say that, right? We would agree solid, consistent character is essential. But the question is, how are we forming our lives around that priority? Do we really believe that, like me, character is everything? Or would you even go as far as saying, yeah, I think it's really important? And if so, how are you shaping your lives around it? And if we're honest, this is where we often blame stress and the choices of others, things outside of our control. So do this. Get to your calendar first. Like, learn to say no to some things that are good so that you can say yes to the best things that you've already put on your calendar or on your goal list or whatever it is. Fifth truth about character being cumulative. In the critical areas of life, you cannot make up for lost time. You can pull, an all-nighter to make up for time that you didn't study for a test. You can drive faster to make up time for unplanned stops, but you cannot cram for better character or better relationships. I'm going to say that again. You can't cram for better character or better relationships. And maybe you've experienced this on the other end when you were a kid. You had like an absent parent. And now in your young adulthood, this parent's like coming around all the time, calling you, wanting your time. They're trying to make up for lost time. And while they can create something new, right? Like if they'd messed up big when you were a kid, that doesn't mean they can't create a new relationship with you, but they can't like make up for the lost time. You're not a kid anymore. Those days are over. And while you may be mad at a parent about that, right now we're talking about you. Like, what are the deficiencies right now in the way you have been neglecting your character? In those critical areas, you don't make up for lost time. Now, God can redeem and create something new in you now. But in thinking ahead, part of, I think, striving for success, right, in what we're talking about as character, is trying to think ahead in ways of, man, I don't want to regret that later. So as I make this decision now, I'm thinking about my future as well. Godly, solid character is built on small, consistent deposits of time. You don't cram for what's important. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 through 16 says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil." I love this old scripture from Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 16. He says, "Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls." But the ancient good way, it's not easy, it's not simple, and it's certainly not magic. You're not going to see results immediately from doing one good thing one time. Life isn't flipping a coin. It's not crossing your fingers, hoping that you make the right decision. It is building character, learning how to be wise, learning to walk with God, learning to face like who you really are. All of this is painful, but it's profitable. All right, character leaks. It's cumulative, and character is revealed by the storms of pain and pleasure. Like, all of us have beliefs that we consider sacred, and we think that we're sincere about those beliefs, and maybe we are. But beyond passionately verbalizing those beliefs, there is a more accurate way of finding out what we actually believe and who we actually are, beyond just how passionately we say it out loud. And this more accurate way of finding out what we're made of is what I'm calling storms of pain and pleasure. So pain reveals our character. A crisis, heartbreak of a relationship, or the death of someone close to us, financial loss, physical pain. And those are big things, but there's also small pains like disagreements and conflict, or just failure, or being cut off in traffic, and just the uncertainty of the future. Like, when you go through small and large pains, it reveals, it opens up who we actually are. I mean, and what we actually believe. Like, that's a more accurate way than just like, here's the stuff I've tried to work out in my brain, and here's what I believe and stand for. That's good, and we've got to do that work. But man, pain, going through difficulties is going to reveal what's in us. So does pleasure. Not just pain. Pleasure reveals our character. Like, unexpected attention from certain people, or success, unexpected success. Maybe someone misinterprets what you did or said, but they misinterpret it in a way that makes you look really, really good, right? And that kind of pleasure can end up revealing something in us that's not so good, especially if we don't maybe correct them. Here's a simple one every day. When the pain of things mentioned earlier, the different pains I listed, crisis, heartbreak, relationship stuff, disagreement, conflict, being cut off in traffic, whatever, when those kind of pains set in, and there's an opportunity to like escape them, right? Pleasure, instead of dealing with them. Like, man, that kind of pleasure, the way we deal with it, that reveals our character. Or choosing the option that makes you feel or look better over what is best or wise or honest. Pleasure reveals as much about our character as pain. And how we respond in storms of pain and pleasure reveals what we actually believe, what we're actually made of. Here's a few examples of beliefs that we might verbalize, even passionately, versus how pleasure or pain might end up revealing reality. I'm not saying this is true of you or me, but it certainly could be, right? So let's say someone says, I believe in the dignity of all people, right? Like, and maybe they're really passionate about that. But you find out this person spends hours looking at pornography, right? Or they have and listen to music that degrades certain gender or certain types of people, right? Do they really believe that dignity of all people, right? Maybe someone says, I believe that God allows freedom, right? I believe in that God has created free will, and that's a good thing. And that's, there's people in government that do evil, but, freedom is so important that God has allowed some of that, right? But then this is revealed, that you find yourself worrying that God is mad at you when you experience the consequences, maybe the negative consequences of your own unwise or ungodly choices, right? Or even you experience some bad things from the choices of others. And you're worrying that, and you're believing that that's happening because God's mad at you. Like, I would ask you, do you really believe in freedom? Or do you believe in something more like karma, like divine karma, like that God, if bad things are happening, it must be you did something bad, and so you need to figure that out, right? Like, that might reveal more of how you actually believe about God and freedom. Someone says they are pro-life, right? But then that person gets pregnant, or they get someone pregnant, right? Or you say, I'm pro-life, but maybe you support some policies that could potentially perpetrate gun violence, right? Or other types of violence. I would ask, are you really pro-life from beginning to end? And those are some examples. And I don't know that I have them all correct and worked out, and those are only just a few. But the point is, storms of pleasure and pain reveal what we're actually made of, our current character. Mark chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 14, they kind of provide a case study in sequence for this. In Mark chapter 4, Jesus' disciples are in a boat, and there's a major storm. I mean, crazy storm, right? Like it's swamping the boat, and they're gonna sink. And they cry out to Jesus because, he's asleep, like you do in the middle of a storm. And Jesus gets up and he calms the storm. Like, it says that he calms the storm and the waves. Like, I don't even know how that works. Like, how can waves just stop? But they did. And it says that the disciples were more terrified after he calmed the storm than before. I think they were terrified of Jesus because it revealed in them that while they would have said they believed in Jesus, they may not have believed in Jesus the way they thought. Because when they actually experienced the presence of God in that kind of profound way, it revealed something else. The storms of life, right? They rip away the fluff and the fog, and all of a sudden you can see clearly, like reality, and that can often be painful and terrifying. The disciples, when they were in the boat in Mark chapter 4, they said, even nature obeys Jesus. Who is he really? 3 to 4 months later, Matthew chapter 14. The disciples are in a boat again. There's a storm, but Jesus isn't with them. But Jesus comes walking on the water. They think it's a ghost. They're like, it's a ghost. And Jesus is like, no, it's me, it's Jesus. And Peter, I think, had learned some things from the Mark chapter 4 storm when Jesus calmed the storm. And he realized, at least internally, like spiritually, like Jesus is more than I thought. I don't think he had that all worked out. And I don't think he had it all worked out in Matthew chapter 14 here either. But Peter says, Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to come to you on the water. Let me walk on water. And Jesus says, come on. And Peter does. And I know Peter sinks, right? And sometimes that's the sermon, keep your eyes on Jesus. And it's cliche, and cliches can be cool sometimes, whatever. So I know he sinks, but of course, right? Like Peter's human. We all fail, but look at what Peter did. Like he chose to step out based on what he had learned before, which I think creates a really cool principle. This little phrase I'm working out here. Here it is. When storms reveal, look within and then step out. I know it doesn't rhyme. Maybe you can figure out something that rhymes and let me know. But for now, I've got when storms reveal, look within, and then take a step out. Because to deal honestly and courageously with the reality of what's in you, you've got to look at what's revealed about us through the storms. But then you've got to take a shaky step forward. You're going to stunt your potential to grow in character if you don't. So you celebrate the good steps forward, however few. You've got to celebrate them. And then whatever's revealed, you look within and then you step out. And as you look within, how can you step out and grow in more courageous character now? Like, what's a step? Because who you are is infinitely more important than what you say or what you build or what you post online or what you lead. I know all of those things can create a ton of good. And also a lot of, the things you say and build and post or lead can also get you in a lot of trouble. You can mess some things up, but they all flow from who you are, because character is everything. And if we're honest, you won't chase after a solid life of character because it's the right or good thing to do, right? Like pride and insecurities tempt us constantly to seek easy pleasure, easy attention, and to try to insulate ourselves from pain. And to make my point, last week I shared about the prodigal son, and I talked about repentance and how our motives to repent, like the boy in the prodigal son, his motive was not righteous. He was hungry, right? He thought, man, my dad might be just good enough to take me back as a servant. He didn't repent and come home because he was righteous. He came home because he was hungry, right? Our motives to repent or to try to work toward good character, they're often selfish, right? And we often don't move toward action until we hit, rock bottom in a certain thing. But the story of the prodigal son, my theological North Star, it shows us that God still comes running. Even though the reasons we come to him aren't always wonderful, he knows that if he can just get us in his presence, if we just come to him, life change is possible. He can do the work if we get to him, whatever the motives are. And the motive for character building is similar. Coming to know Jesus will move us toward the pursuit of character. I get praised for solid character, and I'll take it. I get praised sometimes. People that have been around my leadership for a while. I've had some people tell me that, say that I'm a good pastor or leader or dad or husband, and And those actual roles in my life, like those help in my character, if I'm honest, like, being a leader, knowing that I live in a glass house and people are watching how I respond all the time. Sometimes I make the right decision because of that. It's not always because I have like this deep desire to do the will of God all the time, right? Like, I'm human like you. Being a dad, man, I've got 2 boys that look up to me and that watch me, and I want to live well for them. I have a wife that I have loved since I was a kid, since I was 16, right? And so I adore her. I want her to like be proud of me. And so sometimes those roles help. But all of those roles are connected to my relationship with Jesus. I mean, if I boil it down and I'm as honest as I can be, Jesus is the one that I fear, right? And I mean that word, like, I'm afraid of Jesus. Now, not in a way that I cower from him. I at least have a glimpse, I think, right, of who he is. And I respect and love the Lord deeply. And knowing Jesus changes everything. So I can build my character, which is everything. So here's how I want to end. I want to show you. Well, I'm not going to show you because we're doing a podcast and you can't see me and I can't see you. I want to read to you one last verse to kind of tie all of this up, to kind of show you what I mean in terms of motive, right? Like, in terms of why we run after and chase good character and to live a meaningful, solid life. There's a lot of reasons. But I want to give you this one from 2 Peter chapter 1. So Peter, the same guy we talked about who walked on water and followed Jesus. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 and verses 5 through 8. It says this: by God's divine power, he has given us everything we need for living a godly life, a life of character. We have received all of this. Here it is. This is me trying to connect it all, okay? Using Peter. He says, we have received all of that by coming to know Jesus. So we get all the things we need for a godly character by coming to know Jesus. And it continues. In view of all this, make every effort to add to your faith moral excellence. And to moral excellence, add knowledge. And to knowledge, add self-control. And to self-control, add patient endurance. And to patient endurance, add godliness. And to godliness, add mutual affection. And finally, to mutual affection, add love for everyone. And Peter ends in verse 8. The more you grow like this, it will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus. Okay, that's it. Done. I'm assuming I'll post this. I'm assuming I won't listen to it back and go, oh my word, I fell asleep. That's terrible. But I think I'm going to give this a shot and put it out there since we missed the recording from last week. Hey, SYA folks, and even friends that possibly I haven't met yet, I love you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May you find peace today as you consider your own present character, who you are, shaped by your past decisions. And may God give you hope. And may God even give you an energy of excitement for all that could be in the future in your character as you more and more every day trust in the person of Jesus. Peace and grace to each of you. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the SYA podcast. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram at WeAreSYA.